Bird Alliance Month. Perfect. Everybody consent to being recorded? Cool. So thanks for coming out on your Tuesday night for this presentation. I'm Kevin. I'm the program chair for the Liberty Bird Alliance. This program was something the Pennypack Trust and Liberty Bird Alliance wanted to do because of grasslands. The trust is trying to figure out how to invite more of these birds here, and we're learning a lot about it along the way, as we might talk about a little bit later. But you need a lot of land for grasslands, and the trust is just a little too small for some of these species. But the work they're doing is providing habitat for them up in Chester County. So we appreciate you guys for coming out. It was about an hour drive, I think, for each of them, a little bit over that maybe. So appreciate you coming out tonight and coming all the way to Montgomery County to present this work. Zoe Warner is the program manager for the Grassland Bird Collaboration, a program of Willistown Conservation Trust that partners with farmers and landowners to support grassland bird populations that rely on agricultural lands for breeding. Zoe has been researching grassland birds in southern Chester County since 2014, so over 12 years now. So awesome to have your experience and knowledge. And we have Claudia Winters from Natural Lands. She is the Bird Conservation Program Manager. She oversees all of their bird-related volunteer monitoring and surveying and bird banding programs. That's impressive. And she coordinates with stewardship staff on best management practices for sensitive avian species and collaborates with partner organizations on bird conservation initiatives. While she has been with Natural Lands for 5 years, her position is newly created in October of 2025. So thanks again. It's all yours.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having us. So as Kevin said, we're here to talk to you about grassland birds and really finding common ground to reverse the decline across working lands in Chester County, but hopefully beyond that in other areas of Pennsylvania. So one of the things that is sort of commonly misunderstood, I guess, is people associate grassland birds with the Midwest, which is, that is sort of their stronghold. But we have had abundant populations in the East since, way back when. So with a combination of pre and post European forest clearing, we've created the prairies and savannas that they've needed to be able to survive in this area. So it's not all eastern forests here. We have always had grasslands. And so some of the ways we've had grasslands are with Native Americans before Europeans arrived. They would use fire to clear land for crops and also for clearing for hunting. So this is not a picture of an eastern grassland, but this is actually a wildfire from Yellowstone. But this is the idea is that those black patches in there, that's, it sort of creates this mosaic of clearing within the forests. And then when Europeans arrived, they really kind of ramped up a lot of this clearing. So they cleared areas for crops and grazing, and that actually kicked off an increase in a lot of grassland bird populations because they benefited from that as well. And then we've always had our natural architects, the beaver, establishing beaver dams and then abandoning them. And as they do, they create these beaver meadows that then turn into these shrubby grasslands. So, we've actually, in Pennsylvania, we've had these species that have been associated with open areas since the 19th century, and their populations were pretty stable up through the 1950s. But in the 1960s, the population trends changed, and throughout their entire range, they showed steeper, more consistent, and more geographically widespread declines than any other behavioral or ecological guild. So this was a finding that came from a study done in 1994, but I'm sure all of you are very familiar with the 2019 study, the 3 billion birds study, where we found that 1 in 4 birds had been lost in 50 years. So grassland birds were already in decline before that, but the finding was that 53% of grassland birds had disappeared. So they were the hardest hit land bird group. So that really equates to about 720 million birds in that 50-year period. And then in terms of the birds that we focus on and the birds that are probably the grassland birds that are probably most common, grassland obligate birds, I should say, because there are a lot of grassland associated birds as well. But we kind of focus on 3 obligates, one being the bobolinks. So 3 and 5 bobolinks have disappeared in the last 50 years. And bobolinks are actually considered a tipping point species. So they've lost more than 50% of their population in the last 50 years, and they're actually on track to lose another 50% in the next 50 years if trends aren't reversed. We also focus on the eastern meadowlark. So we've lost 3 and 4 meadowlarks and 2 and 3 grasshopper sparrows. So it's pretty, it's a pretty stark picture, I guess. But I think the thing that we have to keep in mind is that we do still have these birds in fields in our landscape. And so we have an opportunity to do something to start to bring these birds back locally and hopefully collectively more regionally and beyond. So some of the reasons grassland birds have been disappearing have to do with habitat availability. So there are a number of reasons why we have less habitat. One, we've lost a lot of native grasslands, and we actually have native grasslands here, not just from agriculture, but traditionally grasslands. But this graphic really is focusing on the grassland biome. And red is what was historically there, and the blue is what is there now. So we've lost 62% of the grassland biome. We also lose grasslands to development quite frequently. So you've probably seen, farm fields and then whoop, oh, there's a subdivision just like it's laid out there in that picture. And that's hard on the farmers. And of course, then it's taking habitat out of the equation for the birds. Also habitat fragmentation. So here's a picture of a lot of grassy area, but with all those hedgerows and everything in there, they're breaking those grasslands up into small areas that are just not large enough to host these species that want wide open areas. So even when we have certain areas that are grasslands, just as Kevin was saying, they may not be able to host.
What are you talking to?
Oh, Kevin Klein about the drill last night. I didn't think I got credit for wearing my air pack, but I did. I misunderstood the list. Got a Zoom?
Yeah.
You want me to take your shoes and socks off?
No.
I'll get your pills.
Well, I don't hear her now.
Huh?
I don't hear anything.
He's mute. Oh.
Got it.
Okay. Yeah, you can mute all, I think, too. Another loss in the east is that when farm fields are abandoned, we'll have reforestation. And out in the west, it's sort of a really, surprising turn of events. Eastern red cedars were introduced as windbreaks and as providing shade. And the seeds must be pretty tasty because the grassland birds are sowing their own destruction essentially by bringing those seeds further into the grasslands. And so through encroachment, they're losing grasslands. So there's a lot of this, a lot of habitat loss, but then on top of it, our agricultural practices have changed. So we have more agricultural intensification and just changes in land management practices. So one thing that's happened is converting grasslands and to crop production. So this is a picture actually of the opposite of what I'm talking about. So what they're doing here is they're introducing these prairie strips into this crop field to increase the diversity. So you can see the difference, though, in the structure of the vegetation, in the variety of plants versus sort of that monoculture. So when you're losing grasslands to a monoculture, you're taking a lot of habitat and also food sources away from the birds. Synthetic pesticides impact birds' health when they're, when they've encountered it in the fields, but then also if we're diminishing the availability of insects, that impacts their ability to feed their young because they're mainly feeding insects to the babies. Converting hay fields to alfalfa. This is a benefit to farmers. Alfalfa has higher yields. It can be mowed more frequently, but because of that, it creates a shorter window of time when those fields are undisturbed. So I've seen, grasshopper sparrows happily singing away in alfalfa fields, but the problem is they just don't have time to complete their breeding cycle before those fields are going to be mowed because it's pretty intensive. And for us, one of the big things is we have a lot of hay fields in the area we're working in, but if those hay fields are mowed earlier or more frequently, if they're trying to get maybe 3 cuts out of a season, it creates these windows that coincide with the peak breeding season. So if you look at that picture on the top, I mean, obviously nobody's haying their fields that way anymore, but that is traditionally how fields were hayed. So I remember reading one of the Little House on the Prairie books to my daughter, and there was this long description of the days of haying, and they would go out day after day. They have these really long days taking the hay up, and it was just a slow progression through the field. And you can imagine the complementarity of that with these birds, that they need this time to develop, and they also need to be able to get out of the way of disturbance. So it's a slow pace of disturbance. And even, when we had mechanization, in the past, it was not at a pace. It still was at a pace that allowed some of that complementarity compared to today, when you have these very large mowers that can go in and take down hundreds of acres of hay within a few hours. And so there's just no time for these birds to move to a different part of the field, to even, to be strong enough to get out of the way of the mower. So this is one of the things that's really, if fields are being mowed at a time when these birds are vulnerable, there's not a high likelihood that there'll be a high survivability rate. So on top of that, 85% of grasslands are privately owned. So, these birds are highly dependent on these private fields. So among 29 obligate grassland species, 82% of them are distributed in private fields. So the issue really is we're never going to preserve our way out of this problem. There just is not enough conservation money and land to provide enough habitat for these birds. So we really have to focus on a model that will combine private lands with what's available publicly to provide enough habitat for these birds. And so I've been mulling these things over for a number of years, and it was just interesting in the State of the Birds report in 2022, as they were talking about, all that was troubling for grassland birds, the thing that that I came away with was that they said, these losses can be reversed through these voluntary actions that farmers and landowners and conservation organizations can take together. So, in all of the heaviness, I guess, there is a message of hope, and that is we have a chance. And locally here, we have a real chance. We have a lot of things in place to support grassland birds. And so that's really the heart of what the Grassland Bird Collaboration is. It's landowners and farmers and conservation organizations working together to establish a working conservation landscape. So the idea is these are working landscapes. Farmers are deriving their livings from it, but we're inserting conservation in there in a way that works for the farmers. And so through that, we connect these farmlands to the survivability of these grassland birds. And the other thing I think that's really important is to highlight the benefits of these agricultural working lands for grassland birds. So one of the things that I've been so impressed with as I've worked in this field for a few years with these farmers and landowners is, they really see themselves as land stewards, and they have a sense of responsibility. And I think a lot of times, conservationists, we can vilify farmers, and I think that's really an approach that is going to get us not very far. So I think finding this common ground is really important. And so that's at the heart of what we're trying to do. So before we launched the conservation or the Grassland Bird Collaboration, we did a lot of the kind of back work. So we led with research, essentially. So in 2014, I was doing my dissertation research, And I was looking at, I was doing bird surveys and using landscape metrics with the idea that can we predict where we would expect these birds to be across the landscape? And so I developed a model that showed the probability of these birds, the occupancy. So the darker areas is where you would expect the birds to be. And so as I was wrapping this up, I realized, okay, yeah, it's great to know where they are, but what are we doing for these birds? Because if we're not managing for them, it doesn't really matter where they are if they can't be there tomorrow too. So that's when I joined with Willstown Conservation Trust, and we started to think about what do we need to know about these birds. So one of the things we did over the course of 3 years was we nano tagged these birds with MODIS tags. And so when they pass local sensor nomes or when they get within a kilometer of a tower, they'll be detected, and then you can start to track their movement patterns. So you can see that bird toying with us on the top of that net, which was a lot of what happened in the field many times. These birds don't want to get caught. So, they would sit there, or they would start flying in, and then they would start to fly backwards, but we finally did catch our birds. And so we put tags that are, you can see that one in the center of that person's hand. They fit around the hip bones, and then there's this trailing antenna. And so then they're able to be detected over time. So that was one of the things that we did. The other thing we did was we were looking at, can we start to project when it's safe to mow? Because we don't want to just say, hey, never mow. You got to know when it's time to mow. These are working lands. So we did nest searching. And this was another challenge. These are tiny little cups of grass buried at the bottom of 3 feet high grass. So we were able to find some of them. We didn't do comprehensive nest searching, so there were a lot more nests in these fields than we were able to find. But by being able to age these birds, we could then project out when it was safe. And we were finding that around July 1st, the majority of these birds would be mature enough to get away from the mowers, essentially. So one reward of finding the nest is you get to see the babies. So there are perks to the job. There's not much that beats a baby bobolink, for sure. And so as we were doing this, there was work being done by the Virginia Grassland Bird Initiative, much more comprehensively looking at 4 different grassland species and when they were fledging. And so what they found was 90% of their birds were fledging by July 1st. So you can see that red box up there. There are still birds in the nest after July 1st. But the idea is that, we need to think about compromise. And so can we get the majority of these birds safely fledged before the mowers come in? And they like to say in Virginia, yeah, 10% of the birds may still not be ready by July 1st, but 100% are not ready in mid-June. And so that's the idea, is you're going to experience 100% mortality if you're mowing too early. We also had a student come in 2022, Liam Hart, and he was looking at bird occupancy in different field types in Chester County. So he looked at early mow hay fields, late mow hay fields, row crop fields, and wheat and rye fields, and just seeing where these birds were and then where they were breeding. And the interesting thing, or the thing that I sort of felt was gratifying, was where I predicted these birds but wasn't able to do bird surveys, he filled in that area and they were there. So the model held, which was nice. But the other thing that he found that was interesting was that these birds started to show differences in their preferences for these different fields. So they sort of partition the landscape, essentially. So meadowlarks are generalists. They'll be anywhere. But then the bobolinks and grasshopper sparrows were being found in separate fields. So that's another challenge to this, is that we can't provide for all of the birds in a single field. It takes more. So mulch hay fields are these late mow fields. The hay is being taken off and it's sold to the mushroom industry, which is a true blessing in Chester County. Kennett Square is the mushroom capital of the world. They're looking for quantity. They're not looking for high quality hay. And they're also they prefer the field, the hay to sort of stand in the field longer to dry out in season before it's taken off. So it's a market for this late season hay. We have feed hay fields where they want to get that hay off early. It's high quality hay for horses and cattle, and so those will be mowed by late May. And we have grasshopper sparrows, which are later nesters, and meadowlarks, which they'll be early nesters but can re-nest, so they can come into those fields after they've been mowed. And the other thing the grasshopper sparrows like is they like patchier ground. They don't like this sort of thick, dense hay of a hayfield. So those fields work for them. Interestingly, the pastures that were managed for cattle, we've had all three species in there, and that's probably because there's more diversity of structure in those fields. And then we've had meadowlarks and grasshopper sparrows in fields that have hay filter strips. So if you think back to that crop picture with those prairie strips in there, it's a similar thing where they don't necessarily need the whole field to be in grass. They want to be in an open space, but can nest in a smaller area. So some of the things that kind of stand out for us and are important to the model that that we follow is these birds are area sensitive. So their preferences for maybe they have different preferences for habitat structure, but they all want open area because the closer they get to the woods, the more likely they are to have predators. So they want to stay away from the edges. So when you think about the size of a field, you have to kind of cut off all the outside and then look at what's actually in the interior to judge the acreage of that field for the birds. They all benefit from no mow. So, you know, the babies need to be able to have a period of development that's undisturbed. What period that no mow can change somewhat, but they need that full period to not be disturbed. And they also benefit from habitat connectivity. So sometimes there are fields that they'll breed in, they'll forage in another field. We have one wonderful field that is the birds will stage there after other fields have been mowed. They all go there and they spend a few weeks just eating, the seeds and insects before they migrate. So, you know, all of these things are important in kind of determining what are the fields that we want to go after, essentially. And our fields kind of get a stamp of approval in Chester County. So we meet these requirements. And there are other areas in southeastern Pennsylvania that also meet these requirements. And so there's opportunities there for conservation. So as we gathered all of these data and we're preparing sort of our story, in late 2022, we had a meeting with landowners and farmers, and we were able to sort of present what we had found up to that point. And with that data, you know, I think people understood that there's a real opportunity for stewardship here. And that's kind of what enabled us to kick off what we've been doing since 2023 with the field, with our field management, essentially. So the area that we're working in, I've been talking about it, but it's that sort of green blob in the center there. It's an area of 25,000 acres of contiguously protected agricultural land that's part of Chester County's designated rural resource area. So the rural resource area is an area that the county is hoping to support townships to not develop and also to maintain agricultural economies. And the thing that's interesting is the preservation of this area started over 40 years ago when Brandywine Conservancy worked to conserve the King Ranch. And that's actually sort of the heart of where we started and have emanated out from there. And King Ranch is kind of bobbling grow. So it's, they laid the skeleton years ago, and now we're sort of adding on the benefits to it. So the model that we follow is pretty similar. It's been tweaked a bit over the years, but we work with the farmers to prioritize the fields that we include in our network. So even if there's a field that would work really well, but the farmer just can't mow it at the time we need, those aren't the fields we go after. It has to work for both, I guess. So with this, we've been able to have over 2,000 acres in late mow management as of this year. And also we include other 500, at least 500, but there's probably much more this year of what we call other fields. So those would be early mow fields, row hay fields, and also observational fields. So those are fields that we're just saying, hey, could I just get in there? We'll see what's going on. We're not asking you to change management, because that's the way to start a conversation. And as we've worked with the same farmers for a few years, we're looking to increase the number of farmers we're working with. And so I have a lot more observational fields that we're trying to incorporate and just get the information to even say, is this worth, trying to do any kind of bird sensitive management. So as I've said, research was important to launching this, and research continues to be important because people want to know that, that what they're doing is making a difference. So we go out into the field during the breeding season. We have 4 periods that we go out in. We go once each period. And these are really snapshots in time to sort of see what is the composition of the birds, what are the activities, what kind of breeding activity are they displaying. And what we're hoping to see over that time is, are they exhibiting early breeding behavior in, late May, nest building, that sort of thing? Are they exhibiting late breeding behavior towards the end of June? Because we want those fields cleared for mowing. So it gives us a chance to kind of watch the progression of what's happening. Reporting back is really important. So we make sure that our landowners know what we're doing out there and what we're seeing. These were maps I prepared for one of the landowners that started as an observational field. So I was able to show them, hey, the grassland birds were there early, but the field was mowed. So if the mowing was delayed, they would have had the chance to stay. And so he actually became a participating member based on that first year of observation. And engaging with the larger community is really important. So we invite people who may not be hosting these birds on their properties out into the field to just interact. I mean, the birds are the best ambassadors for themselves. There's nothing that beats watching a bobolink burbling up from the field, or listening to a meadowlark singing plaintively from a fence post. It ignites something in people and creates a connection. And we need people to understand that, because we have asked for sort of a cultural shift at the same time. So in the past, fields were mowed around Memorial Day. The farmer said, I'm getting the calls, they call us up, are you coming out? And so we're saying, hey, this landscape is changing. We're asking these fields to stay standing for another 6 weeks or so. So you have to get that buy-in for people to think, oh, there's a reason for that. It's not like somebody's being lazy or somebody's not taking care of their property. And the other piece that's really important is partner organizations. So we've learned so much from the partners we work with. We're able to work together on initiatives to kind of further the journey, I guess. So conservation dollars are always very short. So anytime you can kind of, figure out a way to stretch them a bit through partnerships, it works. So there are some elements that have been important to our success. The first one really was kind of launched our project, was getting the Cornell Land Trust Bird Conservation Initiative grant. So in the first year, we partnered with Natural Lands in 2023 and received the grant, and that kind of started Natural Lands' work. And then we partnered with Brandywine in 2024. So Cornell, of course, is, it lent us credibility among the community members. And they've been wonderful partners in terms of connecting us with other organizations that are doing similar work, and just constantly checking in and supporting the work that we're doing. So it's been an important part of kind of moving this forward. We started from the beginning, collaboration was in our name, and that was the way we wanted to move forward. So collaborating with the farmers and landowners, we didn't come in and say, you must do this, but it was more learning from each other. And I'm so grateful that was our approach, because I've learned so much from the farmers and landowners who have been working and living in this area for decades. I've probably learned much more than I've taught them, for sure, about these birds. So it's, thinking about how do we work together to expand the area that we're providing for the birds. And then I keep coming back to, but research is really important. So showing the importance of these private properties. So we are going out doing these breeding bird surveys, and then it's important to then go back and show what's happening in a single year over time. I mean, we've had some fields that have been part of our program for 3 years, so we can kind of show differences. Now we have some information about density changes. So these are ways to kind of show what to kind of show that one individual property is part of that larger landscape. Also, the MODIS data has been really helpful. We were able to show local movement patterns across the local landscape. One of the interesting things that we did was we tagged birds in one field and then put sensors in another. So we were able to show that this bird was breeding in the one field, but then using other fields. So it's the idea that, you know, just because a bird is in one field doesn't mean those other fields aren't important. It's that habitat connectivity and how the birds are really extending their habitat beyond their breeding locations. And then with being able to track migratory activity, we kind of were able to place how Chester County's fields are part of that larger life history picture. So we could show these migratory pathways. And one of the things that came up over time, over the course of 3 years, was the majority of our birds were stopping in the Delmarva Peninsula. And it wasn't just our birds, it was also birds that had been tagged in Vermont and Maine. So by being able to show this, then it can help to inform management. If you know these birds are coming, if you know they need this habitat at that time, how can we ensure that it's there for them? And then having opportunities to get the word out, essentially. So looking for opportunities for guest speaker opportunities, which tonight, you know, introducing it in this program to new people, local media outlets, that sort of thing. It's the idea of keeping the story in front of people so that they know that these things aren't just, oh, it was solved, it was done, but it's like, how is it evolving? And I actually just recently got to speak, was interviewed for On Point, which they were doing a story about how agriculture is negatively impacting birds, but they wanted to show that there is hope on the horizon. So they used our program, which I thought was nice. And also education is another important piece. So helping people to understand the benefits of grassland management for birds, what their habitat needs are. So we developed this field management guideline for when the question comes up, well, what can I do? And one of the things that I really love about this is this timeline, because it kind of really visually lays out the periods when it's when you really want to stay out of the fields, the periods when it's safe to be in the fields, those sort of intermittent zones, that sort of thing. But we always say, you know, if you really want to know, we'll come out and look at your field. And it doesn't have to be so generalized. There are opportunities for specifics about what's happening in your field. And we also have, as I said, wonderful partners where we have set common goals. And so Claudia is going to talk about the work that they're doing in Natural Lands at Natural. Thank you, Zoe.
So at Natural Lands, as Zoe said, we've kind of been with Willistown Conservation Trust since the inception of this program. And when we had the Cornell grant with Willistown, we did put up grassland bird signage at some of our preserves to kind of have that interpretive signage for people out on the preserves as a form of outreach. We do also have like outreach events, bird walks, bobolinks before breakfast walks, and just general ways that we can have some kind of education for the general public, for our volunteers, and for any landowners as well that may come to these. And so many of our preserves do have grasslands, which we can use to serve as these demonstration areas. And we do employ different management practices throughout our preserves. And we do like to adapt our practices as time goes on. So one of the ways that we kind of are adapting is habitat improvements. So here at our Bryn Coed Preserve, up here we have a new lot that we just added as part of our property, and it's approximately about just over 100 acres. And so there's currently hedgerows that are dividing this property. So we actually went in and removed those hedgerows, kind of where you can see right along the purple and green here. And then we also removed some of them along here, so that we're actually expanding this field quite considerably to include portions of Bryn Coed that already existed. And you guys can't even see that mouse on there. Nope.
No.
Here. and here. So this hedgerow, and some of these hedgerows were removed to kind of expand with the property that we already have, make it more contiguous and expand on, as Zoe was saying earlier, kind of that core central habitat where some of these focal species really need to breed to stay away from predators on the edges. And many times hedgerows can be largely made up of invasive species, invasive shrubs, and we saw a lot of that in our hedgerows that we removed, as well as things like walnuts, which are a dime a dozen around here. So the plan for this is to have like cool season grasses in a lot of the green areas, and we're also doing pollinator strips, which we've done in some of our other fields. And what this allows for is, even after we do the late mow in July, it allows for extra standing foraging areas because we don't mow the pollinator strips in July. So the birds actually have somewhere, even if they've fledged recently, they now have somewhere to go for food, for shelter, and that kind of continues until they migrate. And a lot of times we keep up those strips on the landscape throughout the fall and even sometimes throughout the winter, and mow them kind of like late winter, early spring before the birds come back and before it starts growing again. So it's just a great way to kind of maintain that little bit of extra food, extra shelter for them. And as we kind of saw this year with the amount of snow and snowpack that we had, very hard for birds to find food. So we often saw them perching on the ends of the still remaining grasses like grasses and forbs like goldenrod and big blue stem and things like that. So our Stroud Preserve, we haven't acquired any new acreage, but you can see that yellow line there. That's actually the property boundary. That neighbor is also part of the Grassland Bird Collaboration, and this field is where we have nesting bobolinks. So we kind of share the field. The bobolinks are kind of in the center of the field, so pretty much over here in that location. And what we're trying to do is, again, create like a larger core area, core habitat for them to be able to breed in the center. So we're removing the hedgerows there, again, largely invasive, and adding about 12 acres of meadow onto that. And so once we do that, what we now have is almost 70 acres, or what we will have is almost 70 acres between the neighboring property and our property. So it's really going to kind of enlarge that area. And we're also interested to see the shift if the bobolinks, and we do have meadowlarks breeding there as well, if they're able to kind of utilize more of that core habitat and breed, expand their breeding area.
To advance everything. Oh, yeah, you can just do that one. Oh. Oh, let's just.
So we also have, like I said, we do different types of habitat restoration, different types of maintenance, and for our stewardship practices for our preserves. And one of those is converting former like agricultural areas like row crops and stuff like that into farmland. And so this is a previous conversion that we did, which is Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, which is they do like I said, they convert these agriculture areas into grasslands. And what we're really hoping to see is through like monitoring these habitats through the Grassland Bird Collaboration, we're doing the same type of surveying that Zoe and Willistown are doing on some other private properties and landowner properties. We're hoping to get some data on some of our specific warm season native grassland areas, as well as the other areas which are in cool season or hay on our preserves, and be able to kind of compare the species composition that's going on there. So we do have about 50 acres here at our Cheslin Preserve, as well as our Gwynedd Preserve is about 70 acres. So we're just going to be adding this one to the surveys this year. We do rely on volunteers for to assist us with the surveying. So, you know, as we get more volunteers on board as part of the program, we're able to kind of expand the number of locations and fields that we're able to survey. So Gwynedd, this will be the first year that we start at Gwynedd. And the interesting thing about Gwynedd is we also do practice, along with the native warm season grasses, we do practice prescribed fire there. So in pretty much late winter, early spring, we'll mow sections or we'll burn sections of it every year. And we always change up the different sections as well, so that it's divided into units. So also wanted to talk a little bit about our American Kestrel program. So a lot of the focus for the Grassland Bird Collaboration is on our bobolinks and our meadowlarks and our grasshopper sparrows. Kestrels are a species of greatest conservation need in the state of Pennsylvania. They're also a grassland bird, and they require pretty decently sized grassland habitat, approximately 20-ish acres per nesting pair to be able to support that nest. And so we joined up through the Grassland Bird Collaboration. We joined up with French and Pickering Creeks Conservation Trust to put boxes on not only on our preserves, but also on private properties on their preserves and conservation easements. And so we had started with 26 boxes in 2024 on the preserves, and we're now up to 50 for this current season. So, which is very exciting. And we try and place these boxes in prime habitat for kestrels and keep them about 50 meters or so away from woodlands and edges to attract kestrels to these cavities specifically. They do have a lot of competition from other cavity nesting species such as woodpeckers, titmice, but our biggest problem is European starlings. So, because they will use the kestrel boxes no matter where we put them, especially in places like farmland, they're attracted to areas where people are. They're attracted to farmland, and so you know, along with placing these boxes in good prime habitat, we also have to maintain them. So that's something that we have always asked from staff members, from volunteers, from property owners when we put them up. Ensuring that they're cleaned out every year, monitoring them when the monitoring season starts, and also doing things like replacing the shavings in the boxes whenever the kestrels have kind of a conflict going on with European starlings. So the European starlings will actually remove all of the shavings out of the box, and then they will go pick dried grasses, and place them into the box in like a loose kind of nest that doesn't really have a ton of structure. However, if the kestrels and the starlings are fighting, over the nest, and then the kestrels ultimately win, what happens is you end up with boxes like this, where you have just massive bare floors or openings. So when the kestrels go and they lay their eggs and then they want to start incubating, what happens is the eggs roll out to the corners of the boxes and then they can no longer incubate them. So that's why we ask people to be on top of monitoring, be on top of replacing shavings when need be. And you know, it's just a really great thing for people to kind of get hands-on with the boxes on their properties, and they feel like a real connection with it as well. So like I said, preserve staff, volunteers, property owners all assist with this. So monitoring starts the last week of April for kestrels, and we like to track things like egg numbers, nestling numbers that hatch from the eggs, and then how many fledge from those successfully. So, and when I'm saying, you know, successfully fledge, I'm just talking whether or not they're banded, at least leaving the box. We can't really track them after that, but at least leaving the box, we know that they have successfully fledged. So in 2024, when we started the program, we had 12 out of 26 boxes with actively nesting kestrels that successfully fledged. And right now in 2026, we have 26 boxes out of 50 with currently actively nesting kestrels. And it's really only the start of the season, so we could get even more of these boxes filled. So it's just over 50% occupied right now, which is a really good success so far. And we do try, and also one of the ways that we connect with landowners on this is to actually come out and ban the birds when possible. And not only does it help us connect with landowners, it also helps us to collect data, a point of data on them. So we ban them with aluminum bands just distributed by the Bird Banding Laboratory, which is a branch of the U.S. Geological Survey. And these bands have an 8 or a 9 digit ID number, which is basically like a social security number for the birds. So we ban them around 14 to 25 days of age. And we do this because we want them to be old enough to be able to tell what sex they are, because kestrels are sexually dimorphic, which means the males and the females look different. So this is a female here, and you can tell because it has she has brown and black barring on the wings and the body. And up there in that corner is a male, and you can tell because it has a very large black tail band and has like slaty gray and black barring on the wings. So that's a great way to tell when they're that young. So all of this data goes into the national database for the Bird Banding Laboratory, and we get things like age, sex, location for the birds. So if they're ever recaptured, that gives us that gives whoever recaptures them a great amount of information on where their original location was, how far they've traveled since then, and you know how old they are. And that's a great segue because we actually caught in our Stroud box last year, we actually caught a female kestrel who was in the box. So that's her in this middle picture here. First, she was in the box when I went to go check on the 22-ish day old nestlings, and they're not often in there. The adults almost never are in there when they're that age. They get quite rowdy. They're very loud. It's a small box to be in there with your nestlings. But she was in there, and as I pulled my camera out and watched the video and saw her in there, she stayed in there. So I quickly plugged the hole and got her out. And as I was getting ready to band her, I realized she already had a band. So I submitted the band number to the Bird Banding Laboratory, and they got back to me and told me actually she was banded 7 years prior to that in Salem County, New Jersey by a former coworker of mine. So, you know, banding banding adults is something that we would like to do a little bit more of in the coming years as well, so that we can, and banding and catching adults, so that we can see, you know, how often are they going back to boxes year after year, or, you know, our young birds that are coming back after fledging previous years, are they coming back to that same area and going to one of the nearby boxes in that area? So just kind of a good a good way to get some more data points and some more research into this. So I will hand this back over to Zoe. Thank you.
So Natural Lands is doing some great work on their preserves, and it's just so interesting to see how the preserve work dovetails with work on these private lands, and just kind of the added benefits that we can that, you know, the layering on of benefits, I guess, through these collaborations. So as we look to the future, what's on the horizon, one of the things that we're really excited about is we actually invited Adam York, who's a conventional farmer who has really converted. He works in, his farm is in Illinois, and he has 12,000 acres that he manages. And he has converted his farm to all regenerative practices. So he came and spoke in December, and we had a packed house of farmers, multi-generations, in the same room. And I think he really kind of ignited their imaginations. And so we're working now with some of our farmers to start to implement some of these regenerative practices. One of the things we're doing this summer with one of our farmers is he's going to do test plots of conventional fungicide and natural fungicide. And so the idea is that he's hoping that the natural fungicide will be more effective in preserving the structure of the hay longer into the season. And we're also hoping to maybe see some benefits for the birds as well. So we'll be surveying alongside of that. But the message that Adam really wanted to bring home is, if you feed the soil, if you feed the roots, you know, if you lay off the chemicals, which helps your pocketbook for sure, it also helps your plants, you get higher yields. And so that's really the message that we're hoping we can kind of work with our farmers and increase that idea of putting the conservation in the working landscape. We're also always looking to add acres. So this year we are working more, as I said, doing some more observational fields. I have a new group of farmers that I'm in touch with and wanting to get out into their fields and just see what's available. And so the idea is, you know, we have our focal conservation area, but we'd certainly love to expand beyond that. And part of that is looking for unconventional partners. So as I said, the mushroom industry is this wonderful complement to the bird work that we're doing. And so by reaching out to these mushroom houses, there may be possibilities to develop a framework for actually formalizing some of these late season hay procurement agreements. And the other thing we're thinking is, are there opportunities to sell some of their mushrooms as value added because they are using this delayed hay? So, you know, maybe you'll pay 20 cents more for meadowlark mushrooms. You know, there are examples of people paying premiums for things that they care about. And so maybe there's an opportunity to do some of that work with our mushroom partners. And Pennsylvania is a big state, and, you know, there's about between, well, the state is in hay, and then there's another, I think, about 4% in natural grasslands. And so we really think that this model could be adapted to other areas, maybe some fields here. I don't know how much undeveloped area there is in Montgomery County, I guess, outside of this, you know, more developed area. But that's what we're looking to do. We're working with trying to expand into northern Chester County, but where there's opportunities, there's certainly hope to do some of this work. And so, you know, what we're really looking to what we hope to kind of make sure that the message that gets out is there is a possibility for coexistence of agriculture and birds. And these two pictures really sum it up for me. So, you know, here we have a picture that you can see the agricultural productivity of the land. And that's really what has been able to hold off the development that kind of comes in all, wants to push in from all sides. And then we have one of the birds that is dependent on these agricultural lands. And so the idea is the Grassland Bird Collaboration wants to be the bridge between these two to develop a conservation land ethic for all those who love and use the land. And this work is only possible with many hands, as they say, many hands make light work. So we need this diverse network of individuals, farmers, landowners, regional partners, supporters, scientists, and people like you in this room who care and want to know more. So thank you for having us. And it's been a pleasure to share our program with you tonight. I don't know, are there any questions from the audience? Yes.
Anybody done anything with serpentine barrens like you're doing in Chester County?
Yeah, we have serpentine barrens on some
Yeah.
of our preserves.
I was just wondering if anybody had done bird studies in those areas. I'm thinking that
Yeah.
probably add another 1,000 acres to study areas, maybe different birds, but
Yeah, the remaining barrens that we do have are pretty broken up and small. So I think we have about 20-ish acres at Willis Brook Preserve. We have a fraction of that at a couple of our other preserves. And then we have the Unionville Barrens at Cheslin. And a lot of those areas are very broken up by like stands of trees and things like cedars that are in there. So they're not like complete grassland
Right.
habitat.
well, I would expect it to be some other birds besides grassland birds.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, we do have eBird surveying on the preserves in those areas as well. So
Yeah.
If somebody wanted to get involved and help with the volunteering, how does that work? Like the bird surveying?
for
You
In
said some of
general?
the,
Yeah.
like some of the fields.
yeah, they could reach
volunteers.
out to me and I could get them connected with our volunteer manager, and I'm in charge of running like the volunteer program specifically for birds. So I'd be happy to talk to anyone who was interested in being more involved in that.
We have a field tech that we hire for the summer, but I'm sure, if there was somebody who was interested in sort of shadowing, at least to go out and just kind of see what the surveying is like, there would be an opportunity there. So if you can share my information too, and he's actually new at it, so he might like the company. Yes.
The reason why the nest boxes are so high, whereas in Florida, where I lived for about 20 years, they were much lower. They almost looked like bluebird boxes in the height that when they were attracting chestnuts.
Yeah, so our boxes are actually lower than I think that a lot of people have been putting them, but I did speak with people from the Game Commission as well before we started putting them up, and their kind of thought was, as long as you're like 8 foot or up, it's high enough for them not to interfere for like human interference, and then it's high enough for them.
Those boxes that I saw were much higher than 8 foot.
Yeah, so ours are about 12-ish feet. Yeah, 12 or 13 feet. So we tried to, some of the original boxes that were put up on the preserves are about 17 feet. So we're trying to use things like, we have a double hinged post design. So it's got a hinge on the bottom, and then it's got a hinge where the box is attached, so we can lower it down. So we try and use like a 4x4 put into the ground, and then an additional 4x4 12-foot post on top. So you have the bottom one that sticks out about a foot or two, about 2 feet, and then the top one is up another 12 feet. So the total post is about 14 feet, but the box is slightly lower than that. So the hole is actually at probably about 13-ish feet. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of like how big a hedgerow has to be to interfere with the birds between fields? Because I just think of, can they just fly over it? And also it kind of makes me think of, the homegrown national park concept of piecing together pieces of land and how that's how we'll get around all this development. But if breaking it up with a hedgerow really interferes with the habitat enough for these birds, then that really doesn't work.
And I think it depends. It's really dependent on what people can do, dependent on the size of the fields that are already there. Like for us as a conservation organization, if we see an invasive hedgerow that's impeding the amount of core habitat that these birds can have for a larger nesting area, then we can say, okay, well, let's remove that invasive hedgerow. But that's not really something that everyone can do. Piecing together pieces of like conservation landscape can be very helpful to bird species in general. But we're looking at these specific focal species where we're like, okay, well, let's see if we, as a conservation organization, can expand on that existing habitat.
It just seems that this type of bird in particular is more sensitive to needing a big expanse of grassland that's uninterrupted.
Yeah. So these are grassland obligates that are looking for that large interior area, because for them, they're nesting directly on the ground. And so, the hedgerows allow for predators to lurk. And so they don't want to be too close. The safety for them is distance, because they're not up in a tree or something like that. So when we measure fields, we have a buffer that we kind of take that out, and then we want to know what is the size of the interior of the field. But that's, there are other grassland associated birds that wouldn't have a problem with hedgerows. Like kingbirds or bluebirds, field sparrows. So I think the issue is we have to think about managing certain fields for certain birds, and then other fields for other birds. Trying to figure out with the land that's left, how are we going to put it all together? Yeah.
I'm just curious about something. So are these native birds, or they come from someplace else?
They're native.
Oh, because I remember one time attending a little program when my children were in school, and I was told, it was presented that Pennsylvania was always woods. So, like a squirrel could hop from tree to tree all across Pennsylvania. So what are these grasslands, if they're like, they were just created, I guess, right?
Well, so
that's why I'm wondering, why are the birds there if originally Pennsylvania was all woods?
Well, because
is that
a
question or not?
No, it's a good question, and I think that's one of the reasons why people don't necessarily associate these grassland birds with Pennsylvania. But so there have always been open areas even before European settlement, with the fire, the burning, and then also
the natural
barrens, beaver, abandoned beaver dams. But then the Europeans. The Native Americans clearing areas. But then when the Europeans came, they really, did some land management. So that actually, we had smaller populations before that, but then with the way that they were farming, they were actually able to increase the populations quite a bit. So the peak of the population actually came through human management.
Oh. Now, and how about Ambler Temple? Temple Ambler. Temple Ambler. Would that be a source of?
It's going to be possibly for sale.
Oh,
the Arboretum.
Okay.
It's the whole thing.
The whole thing. It used to be the Women's School of Horticulture, and then Temple bought it. Temple Ambler campus.
Oh, Temple Ambler. I see what you're saying. And what are their open spaces there?
The site, the entire site in Upper Dublin. Being studied for potential sale.
These birds probably not, but definitely a lot of other different species if it's managed, right? It's just not large, probably
You
not
don't
large
think
enough.
it's large enough for, well, that parking lot used to be all grass, if I remember, I mean. Back in the
So
day, I was a
usually-
kid. I don't remember, but that's, I mean, I was a kid.
When I'm judging a field, like sometimes somebody will give me an address and I just go right on Google and I start to like analyze it. And usually what I'm looking for is, first of all, like how complex or simple is the field. So if you have a lot of tree intrusion and that sort of thing and a lot of convoluted lines, that's a pretty complex field where you're not going to have a lot of interior area. So you think of a simple field as a square or a circle, that if you cut out the edges, you still have a lot of interior area. So, and then kind of a minimum threshold is about 25 to 35 to 30 acres. And that's like pristine kind of field. And also likely having within the context of a lot of other fields, not being isolated. So one of the things with Willistown Conservation Trust, they're not close to this area, and so they have some preserves with large grasslands, but they're more islands because there's a lot of development around it. So the other thing about this area that we're working in is that you have all of that preserved land, even if we're not surveying each of those properties. It's wide. I mean, you drive in from Westchester and all of a sudden you think you're, in another world because it's just a completely different landscape than what we're used to in a lot of southern Chester County
So something like.
or
that,
southern
land would be
Pennsylvania.
Modified. If they, put a parking lot in, they can dig it out. It can be done out.
Well, if it's an island in a sea of development, not
Well,
likely.
it probably is.
It's
I
next
haven't
to
seen it.
Robbins Park, but it's 187 acres.
Is
It's
it
like-
187?
Yeah.
Isn't that a lot?
I already asked Natural Lands if they were looking at it.
Okay.
They're not?
I think it's too developed.
I don't know.
Yeah. I asked Catherine.
Um,
That
we,
could be a dream, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if that could happen. I know my son lives out in Minnesota. Man, I never saw so much wide open fields
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Oh, it's something else.
The cattle land that you're looking at, or that had been good for all three species, the target species, is that mostly dairy farming?
I think it's probably beef
It
production.
was, the King's Ranch was where the Texans sent their cattle
Right.
to fatten them up for the New York market. Is what
Yeah.
they explained to us when I visited, I think Cheslin or somewhere.
yes. Mhm.
Yeah, years ago.
So we don't have a lot of beef production in that area, and even dairy, but some of these smaller farms that are managing through rotational grazing and that sort of thing, those are the kinds of fields that can have all three species.
Is it mostly dairy cattle? Or is it, what's
I think they're beef.
beef?
Yeah.
Yeah, the property that I mentioned before that's borders Stroud Preserve where the bobolinks are breeding, they actually practice cattle grazing on their side of the property, and the bobolinks are successfully breeding there year after year. So
So the landowners want the grassland for the beef.
yeah, and they're part of the Grassland Bird Collaboration. They've been cooperating with Natural Lands for years now to mow pretty much the same time when we mow as well. So which we do the late mow in July.
Yes.
As far as Montgomery County goes, are you familiar with like the Erdenheim and Dixon Meadow area?
Heard of Dixon Meadow.
It's,
Yeah.
they get a lot of visitors, but there really isn't much breeding there.
Okay.
So I just didn't know if that was an area that we're familiar with and if there's any plans on working. Is there any cooperation going on with like the Erdenheim farm?
Not as of now. I had started talking with Vince Smith last spring about some opportunities from the Audubon, Valley Forge Audubon, and we just kind of haven't gotten back to it. It ends up being, it's sort of an unwieldy process, but it's something to explore. I'd love to kind of identify a partner in Montgomery County that has the capacity to do some of this, and then kind of go back and forth a little bit about what's possible, what are the areas that's.
Yeah, like the Dixon area is small and then there's a little field, but the grasslands in the farm are actually quite large and that. But
Yeah.
They have to, like you said, they have to mow at the right time. And if they
Right.
don't, then you know. But right now, they just get visitors. They're there for a while, but they don't breed there, as far as I know.
Oh, so they're passing through.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and so that's something, sometimes it's hard. One of our fields is kind of crazy. We were there one year and she had her bobolinks that were going to be breeding. They were setting up territories. And then there were about 50 bobolinks off to the side. They were this huge group,
Yeah.
but they were visitors too.
Yeah.
Even though it was a breeding field, they were moving on, you know.
The other day, we had at least 25, 30 bobolinks there, but they don't stick around. They move on. They don't breed there.
This is, I guess, just about the tail end of them because the safe breeding dates start on May 15th. So if you see a bobolink in a field, they're supposed to be more likely to be breeding after the 15th. But you know, they still can move on, of course. And if you see a big flock and they're not sort of separating out on the field, then they're more likely to be, yeah. Any other, oh, yes.
So I wonder, the July 1st date with the mowing, like, really interesting story. Are you monitoring that for shift in that date at all? Because it seems like there's, could be a climate change impact of how when the birds are breeding and how they're moving through. But then there's also dependence on what the behaviors of the farmers. And when are they planting? Like, is that going to change? Is that going to shift with the climate change impact? So I just wonder, do you worry at all about that date shifting, or does it seem like that's pretty consistent? That's a good date for a long period of time.
I think the date definitely could shift. I mean, we're seeing so many things shift. So it's not really a great, you don't want to be too hard and fast about things, but you're also asking somebody who's trying to, to make a living to be able to still get value from that field. So it's possible that the shift could actually happen earlier, but then they might also need to shift their mowing. One of the things the farmer told me the other day, which I was it never occurred to me, but he said, you say July 1st, but if you said the 15th, it would be okay. And I'm thinking, well, you might want to get in there as early as you can. But he said, we're doing our, I think they're planting wheat then. He's like, we don't want to be disturbed. So, we want the people to know that we'll get there when we're ready. So, don't say the 1st, just say July, let them, we got to come in when we're ready to come in. So I was thinking I'm doing them a favor by saying, hey, get in by the 1st, but he's saying, no, don't say anything. Just, so these are all things that, you learn as you're communicating for sure. So.
There are no questions in the chat.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Oh.
Can I just ask a simple question? These kestrel boxes, if you planted a tree there, would the kestrel nest in the tree? In trees, right? They nest in trees.
Well, they do nest in natural cavities in trees.
Cavities.
Yeah. So what you're doing if you plant a tree is you're inviting a lot of other species to also, and it's harder to protect from predators coming up the pole and things like that, or coming up the tree trunk if it's a tree, things like that. So when we put in kind of these artificial cavities as much as possible, we're trying to ensure the success of the kestrels. So that's always the point, is to try and have them succeed above anything else in their nesting attempts.
So the box is like an artificial cavity.
Correct. Yeah, it's an artificial nesting cavity. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and they do have, like I said, they're cavity nesters. There's other cavity nesters as well. So we're specifically putting them all the way out 50 meters away in a field, away from things like probably woodpeckers and titmice and things like that might nest in them as well. And that's another reason why they're up a little bit higher too, is so that things like bluebirds and tree swallows and stuff aren't consistently trying to nest in there. So we're trying to really make habitat or make nesting opportunities specifically for these species of greatest conservation need. So.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.